Today from the global lane, Iran gets closer to developing a nuclear bomb. Trump may opt for negotiations over an airstrike to eliminate the threat.
This regime will not fall or submit to the international community by bombs from the sky. And certainly, those bombs from the sky will not address Iran's nuclear weapons program or its terrorism infrastructure.
President Trump proposes a ban on birthright citizenship. We look at the original intent of the 14th Amendment.
Somehow it just kind of worked into our nation's psyche that if you're just born here, that's all that's necessary. And that's never what that amendment said or intended.
Utah State University assigns a transsexual male to a women's dorm.
She messaged me and said, "Mom, I think a man pretending to be a woman moved into my dorm suite." Never in a million years could I have imagined that the university would do this.
And gender dysphoria, restoring common sense in America. And it's all right here on the global lane. Iran has issued a warning to Israel and the United States, stating that it will respond immediately and decisively if they attack the country's nuclear sites. The Iranian foreign minister described such an action against his country as crazy, while President Trump maintains that Iran should not be allowed to possess nuclear weapons. He seems to prefer pursuing a negotiated settlement. Dr. Majid Sagdapur, political director of the Organization of Iranian American Communities, joins us with more. Dr. Sagdapur, how do you and many Iranian Americans think President Trump should respond to Iran's warning?
From our perspective, obviously what we see in the streets of Iran is that the regime has a problem. The Iranian people want to overthrow this regime and are engaging this regime in really day-to-day combat. In a way, that is seen in the number of executions in Iran, really exceeding over 1,000 last year. So that tells us that the people of Iran, and hence our community, wants the Iranian people to have the opportunity to overthrow this regime. Relative to what the U.S. policy towards Iran has been and what we want it to look like is that so far the U.S. policy has been to help change the regime's behavior. What we contend, our community contends, and really mirrors what happens in the streets of Iran, is that the people of Iran long ago gave up on this regime. This regime has to be overthrown. But to do that, we need President Trump, we need the United States to side with the aspirations and the wishes of the people of Iran. And I might add also how the United States Congress has, through multiple resolutions, the latest HRS 1148, is to support the people of Iran and their organized resistance politically and morally so that they can overthrow this regime and address this perpetual threat that we see in the global arena.
Well, President Trump has criticized the Biden administration for allowing billions of dollars to flow into Iran. Much of that money was used to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, other proxies to spread terror to Israel and elsewhere in the Middle East. So we don't see that their behavior was altered positively. So should there be a return to harsh economic sanctions? And wouldn't that only hurt the Iranian people?
Right. And a lot of that fund, a lot of the funds that they received over the past 4 years was not only used to prop up the proxies they had throughout the Middle East, but also really a significant portion of it was spent on persecuting and executing the Iranian people. It is only that through those executions and tortures and killings is that this regime is surviving. So we support, as the people of Iran certainly do, the return to maximum pressure policy. But that maximum pressure will not yield results. Remember the goal of the people of Iran, and we believe the goal of American policy should be to help the Iranian people achieve a democratic regime change. And to that end, that maximum pressure policy has to be supplemented with political support for the organized Iranian opposition. And certainly we believe, our community believe, the most viable, most longest acting, longest serving Iranian opposition group in existence is the National Council of Resistance of Iran.
Well, and the people are suffering beyond the arrests and the killings. Inflation is at about 50% in Iran. The unemployment rate is high, especially for young people, hovering at 20%. It seems the country's leaders and people would be more than anxious to strike a deal with Trump. So your thoughts on that, striking a deal?
Well, I am sure that they are and then they have been on in front of the cameras here in the United States and in Europe, suggesting that they want to make a deal with the regime in Iran. But making a deal with this regime, this illegitimate regime, I might add, is making a deal with the devil. They may prolong the negotiations for as long as they can so that they can prolong their regime. But no deal with this regime is worth the paper it is written on. This regime is predatory in nature, is misogynist, is fascist, and to the core fundamentalist, Islamic fundamentalist. And the only solution really is to change this regime.
What effect, Majid, would an airstrike have against nuclear sites there? Would that embolden the regime and help the regime, or would it weaken it? Because I know Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to send advanced weaponry, including air defenses, to Iran, and recent Israeli airstrikes weakened Syrian and Iranian air defenses. So wouldn't this be the most opportune time for Israel to strike Iranian nuclear sites before new defensive systems are put in place? What effect would that have?
Right. Well, the core assumption here is that this regime, this sort of attack, will be weakened and hence will come to the table and will make a better deal. The assumption is that we are able to weaken this regime or delay the nuclear weapons program of this regime. Remember, most of this regime's nuclear plans and research facilities and ballistic missile activities are underground and are not submitted to the international community. So to answer your question directly, this regime will not come to the table in good faith. Its survival depends on developing nuclear weapons. It has lost a lot of its strategic depth by losses it suffered in Lebanon and beyond in Gaza. And so it is increasingly relying in prolonging negotiations or asking for negotiations abroad, and certainly by killing and increasing the killings of the people of Iran. To the contrary, I think this regime is really weak inside Iran. And it is that the international community should put their finger on. This regime will not fall or submit to the international community by bombs from the sky. And certainly, those bombs from the sky will not address Iran's nuclear weapons program or its terrorism infrastructure.
Okay, regime change is the word. Majid Sagdapur of the Organization of Iranian American Communities. Thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
After a federal judge temporarily blocked President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, Vice President J.D. Vance asserted that the administration will not back down from the fight. During an appearance on Face the Nation, he argued that birthright citizenship should only apply to lawful permanent residents or legal immigrants who intend to reside in the United States.
If you come here on vacation and you have a baby in an American hospital, that baby doesn't become an American citizen. If you're an illegal alien and you come here temporarily, hopefully, your child does not become an American citizen by virtue of just having been born on American soil.
Joining us to discuss more on the issue of birthright citizenship and the legal battle ahead is Dr. John Eastman. He's Senior Fellow at the Claremont Institute. Dr. Eastman, it seems that much of the legal debate about citizenship and the 14th Amendment centers around the idea of jurisdiction. In your recent article, you suggested it's more about allegiance than jurisdiction. Explain, please.
Well, the drafters of that amendment were asked directly what they meant by subject to the jurisdiction, because there were two ideas that were covered by that phrase. One that was called partial or territorial jurisdiction. If you live within our borders, unless you're a diplomat, then you're obviously subject to our laws while here. And they were asked if that's what they intended, and they specifically said no. It means subject to the complete jurisdiction, owing allegiance, such as exists among citizens, or the Supreme Court would later say for lawful permanent residents who are permanently domiciled in this country. Not for temporary visitors, whether they're here legally on a student or tourist or work visa, and certainly not for those who are here illegally without our consent at all. And that was quite clear that that's what they meant, and it remained clear that that's what they meant for 3/4 of a century. Somehow it just kind of worked into our nation's psyche that if you're just born here, that's all that's necessary, and that's never what that amendment said or intended.
Well, it was 150 years ago. So what was the original intent then of Congress when the 14th Amendment was proposed?
Well, it was very clear. They were codifying the 1866 Civil Rights Act, and that one specifically said, born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power. So if you're visiting here, the word they used was temporary sojourners. If you're a temporary sojourner and you still owe your allegiance to a foreign power, your king or the emperor of China or whatever, then this clause does not give you your children automatic citizenship. They were very clear about that. Now, we didn't have illegal immigration at the time. The question arose in the context of Native Americans who owed allegiance to a different power, their tribes. And the drafters of that language were quite clear. Even though they're born on U.S. soil, they would not be citizens. Supreme Court held as much in an 1884 case called Elk versus Wilkins. So this was the clear understanding, and it remained that understanding. I've not been able to trace exactly when this understanding changed, but it wasn't anything formal. It was either in the late 1930s or maybe as late as the 1960s that government officials started acting as though anybody born here, no matter what, were citizens. But there was no court decision. There was no formal pronouncement. It just kind of morphed into our psyche.
What other cases came before the Supreme Court on this issue, and how did they rule?
Well, the first case that took up 14th Amendment at all was called the slaughterhouse cases. And there, both the majority justices and the minority justices said quite clearly that the clause was intended to protect, not to give citizenship to the children of diplomats. Everybody agrees on that. And then it said, or the children of foreign nationals, citizens of another nation. And that's what we're talking about. Elk versus Wilkins did the same thing a decade later. Wong Kim Ark is the case often cited for changing the rule that if you're just born on U.S. soil, you're a citizen. But Wong Kim Ark involved parents who were permanently domiciled in the United States. And the court said their children are therefore citizens. It had nothing to say about children of illegal immigrants or children of temporary visitors. That was not at issue. And then we get, people now look at Wong Kim Ark as if it settled the question. It clearly did not. And had it settled the question, 20-some years later, in 1924, Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act, offering citizenship to every Native American born in the country. That would not have been necessary if the Supreme Court had already settled that question in the Wong Kim Ark case.
Well, everyone expects this to eventually work its way up to the Supreme Court, but what are the chances Congress may weigh in on this and propose new legislation? If so, wouldn't that likely be challenged in the courts?
Well, Congress would adopt the same understanding as President Trump's executive order. And then you're all of a sudden looking at a court decision where both political branches have weighed in on their understanding of the Constitution, and these are co-equal branches, and they each have independent obligation to enforce the Constitution. So that would make for a very interesting legal challenge when the political branches and say, look, Eastman and the other scholars that have looked at this stuff and said we've been misinterpreting the Constitution for about a half a century. The original first century after the 14th Amendment was adopted, that's not what we did. And going back to the original meaning and, look, ending things like birth tourism. I mean, our main political enemies on the world stage, Russians going to Miami to have born babies and then go back to Russia with a citizen certificate, or Chinese immigrants coming, Chinese mothers coming and renting luxury hotel rooms for a month until they deliver their baby and go back with the holy grail of American citizenship. This is nonsense. And I think President Trump understands it's nonsense. And because, in my view, it's not compelled by the Constitution, he can do something about it.
Okay, I'm sure it's a long road ahead on this, a legal battle ahead. Dr. John Eastman of the Claremont Institute, thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary, for having me on the program. Take care.
The United States government now recognizes only two sexes, male and female. The new policy is among the 300 executive orders recently signed by President Trump. While it applies to the federal government, its cultural impact is already being felt. So what's next? Here to set us straight is campus reform whistleblower and mom Cheryl Saltzman. Cheryl, it's good to have you with us. So first, explain your daughter's experience at Utah State University when a trans biological male was placed in a female dorm.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. before my daughter came home after the first semester finished so that she'd come home for Christmas, she messaged me and said, "Mom, I think a man pretending to be a woman moved into my dorm suite." And I said, "Are you sure?" And she said no. And I didn't believe her. And it's not that I thought she was lying. I thought she must be mistaken, that there was a sibling or friends or people moving her new roommate in. And when she worried, she stewed about it all Christmas break. And I kind of blew her off because never in a million years could I have imagined that the university would do this. And not only that, so when she went back to school and it was confirmed, I mean, he was interviewed, hired as the resident assistant, and installed or put into her small dorm suite. And so it wasn't like this happened, under the radar. He slipped through the cracks. He was intentionally and consciously put into this dorm by the faculty and staff of the university. So it's just so shocking. And so.
Well, what was your reaction to this, and how was your daughter treated for opposing the policy?
Yeah, I've just been in shock. And number one was to get her out. And then number two was to just do everything I could to make change and everything. And, really, Utah State is a conservative community with a university that has had woke indoctrination infiltrated into, the university, like so many universities and colleges across the country. And so for her, it's been good. She's run into the RA, who, by the way, is still the RA. He's still living in the dorm suite. And there are 3 girls still living in there with him. And so the university's really dug their heels in. But she was nervous at first. It's been kind of a roller coaster for her, but for the most part, she's been pretty insulated from a lot of it. And she's not on social media, so that helps. And she has had so much support.
Well, President Trump signed an executive order recognizing only 2 sexes. That affects federal agencies, but what guarantee is there that colleges and universities like Utah State will follow this lead?
Well, that's so awesome. And I think it really shows just a cultural shift it's got to help, right? It is astounding. I think it's been so shocking to see how stubbornly indoctrinated these universities are. Like, they are very entrenched in this ideology. And so they're waiting for the law to make them make changes. And that's disappointing because they could start protecting girls' rights and girls' safety and showing their students that they care about women and girls and their well-being. But if it's going to have to come from the law and then they make changes, I guess that's how it's going to have to be. But
well, I was going to ask you what else needs to be done, because before Joe Biden left office, a federal judge overturned his proposed change to Title IX rules, which affected gender identity in sports and education. So what else do you think needs to be done to protect the rights and privacy of girls and women in American society?
Well, that's a good question. I'm so new to all of this. I know that me and my daughter went and gave a statement at the legislative committee last Thursday, and it passed for a new bill just here in Utah. I think Trump making that statement on his very first day in office shows it as a priority to him. And so I really hope that he can really just codify or do whatever it takes so that it can't just be overturned the next time we get someone in office.
It looks like states are going to take it into their own hands now, and we appreciate you. Thank you, Cheryl Saltzman, campus reform whistleblower and mom. Thanks for setting us straight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
President Trump is fulfilling his promise to reverse Biden-era policies that redefine gender. In his initial moments in the Oval Office, he signed an executive order aimed at protecting women's rights. The order followed Trump's declaration of his intentions during his second inaugural address.
As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
On January 28th, President Trump signed an executive order aimed at protecting children from what he described as chemical and surgical mutilation. This order prohibits federal funding and support for gender reassignment surgeries and hormonal treatments for minors. The order directs the government to not fund, sponsor, promote, assist, or support the so-called transition of a child from one sex to another. It emphasizes rigorous enforcement of all laws that prohibit or limit these life-altering procedures. Additionally, the order instructs the Secretary of Health and Human Services to take all appropriate actions to end the chemical and surgical mutilation of children. During his campaign, the president expressed his intention to restore common sense to America. This directive abolishes a misguided policy that has profoundly affected the lives of many young people. Some have grown up regretting their inability to bear children or breastfeed due to earlier interventions. Many face a lifetime of health issues, often stemming from the influence of teachers or family friends who convinced parents that their child was trapped in the wrong body. It's striking how people in the West express outrage over female genital mutilation in developing countries. Yet at the same time, they allow similar practices to occur in their own children. They play the role of Dr. Frankenstein, attempting to reshape their children according to their beliefs, rather than accepting them as they were created. Bravo, President Trump. You're making a transformative move, not only for the federal government and U.S. taxpayers, but also for bringing back common sense to American culture and society. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.